Welcome to Silmarillion chat number 9. We're covering chapter 20 this time of the 5th battle, Niarnaeth Arnoediad. This is a short chapter comparatively that has a lot in it compared to the last couple we've done. The last 3 videos I've done, or 4, have been quite long because of the sheer amount of page count and therefore events. Here we're much shorter. I think it's 10 pages or so. Yeah, 10 pages. But it is the, if you like, it's the political and cultural climax and disaster that shapes the remainder of the story. Up to this point, there's been an ongoing war between first just the Sindar, then the Noldor come and join them and lead the war, and then men come and join them, in fact, as well, in the Dagor Bragollach particularly. And there's this kind of political landscape, and here that part of the story breaks, it ends. And we've already, the Dagor Bragollach leads to some of that changing and falling apart, but things have been recovered, and Beren, particularly this is the relevant thing, at the very start of this chapter, Beren and Luthien have taken the Silmaril from, one of the Silmarils from Morgoth's crown, and they've escaped, and Morgoth has been humbled in the face of the world, shown that he is not as powerful as he claims. And we start here with Beren and Luthien going back to the northern lands of Middle-earth and to Doriath. They've been sent back from the halls of Mandos, and the only time the god Mandos ever has mercy or changes or pities anyone, rather than being inexorable as he normally is. And they go to Menegroth. They heal the winter of Thingol because Luthien isn't dead, and so things get better in Doriath, but her mother is very sad because she knows Melian is a Maya, an angel, and she knows that this, Luthien's going to die, and they're never going to meet again after that because they have different destinations. And so eventually Beren and Luthien go and live out their life on an island called Tol Galen down in the southeast of Beleriand and Assyriand, where the Green Elves live. It's called the Land of the Dead That Live, and they have a son, Dior Aranel the Beautiful, or Dior Elukil, Thingol's heir. And that's a kind of conclusion to the Beren and Luthien story, though it's an epilogue, and so it comes here to frame the fact that Beren and Luthien are now off the scene. They have come back, but they are off the scene. But Beren and Luthien's triumph has inspired Maethros. Maethros is the eldest son of Feanor, Feanor's heir, who explicitly gives up the kingship to Fingolfin, his uncle, as a part of the peace he makes with him. And Maethros is the best of the 7 sons of Feanor. There's something it's something you realise actually ends up almost working against him at points, but he opposes the burning of the boats at Losgar. He wants his friends to come across. He wants the rest of the elves to come. He doesn't want to betray them. He gives up the leadership of the Noldor to Fingolfin after Fingon, his friend, rescues him. He constantly seeks to combat Morgoth and focus on Morgoth. And here we have him attempting, inspired by Beren, to form an alliance. Now that Morgoth has been humbled, remember, this is the same as Fingolfin thinking, well, look, we will do our best to defeat Morgoth, and these are the best ways to do it. And Maethros is of a similar mind and a similar wisdom. And remember, Fingolfin is the was seen as the greatest elf lord of this time, and Maethros actually in many ways mirrors him. He's a good man who, and that's an important point for later chapters. And he wants to bring unity, and he wants to focus on the bad guys. He's not, you might say, well, he only wants the Silmarils, but no, he actually genuinely thinks Morgoth is just a bad guy. And he knows Morgoth will destroy them all if they could not again unite. And so he began those councils for the raising of the fortunes of the Eldar that are called the Union of Maethros. And there's an interesting thing here, that basically at this point, not just the kinslaying itself, but the fallout from that, and the curse that is now working on the hearts of the sons of Feanor and on others, and the effect of the Silmarils begins to poison the alliances that could be made. So Nargothrond, for instance, Orodreth, now successor of his brother Finrod, who died on Beren's quest, Orodreth refuses to send anyone out to help in the League of Maethros, the Union of Maethros, because of what Celegorm and Curufin were doing in the last chapter, particularly, corrupting the hearts of the people of Nargothrond, kidnapping Luthien, etc. Only a small company comes forth following Gwyndorson and Gullin, a very valiant prince, and he goes against the will of his king because he grieves for his brother Gelmir. And he takes on the badge of Fingolfin, marching under the banners of Fingon. Fingon is now the High King because of Fingolfin's death. There's an interesting thing that the exact line of succession isn't completely clear in terms of the way it works. So Finwë dies and his eldest son Feanor becomes High King. Feanor dies and there seems to be a discussion or a reasonable debate about whether Maethros should be High King, primogeniture would call it, or whether seniority creates the kingship, the Eadom, which would make Fingolfin the king. And Maethros solves the problem immediately by saying, we give up our right to this and you are the king, you're the eldest anyway. So he kind of says, look, we might as well have seniority, and as repentance for what's happened, we give that up. Here, of course, in a funny way, it is Maethros who is functioning as High King, attempting to put together something that can actually save the Eldar. The problem is that he is exactly the leader of a family cursed by their own sin, their own evil and violence and viciousness and greed. But nonetheless, that's it's a good idea. You would think if to go back to the primogeniture thing. Of course, now with Fingolfin dead, Fingon succeeds via primogeniture, and I guess that's because his uncle Finarfin is not here, but in Aman, back in the west, and Fingon, if he is old, I guess if he is younger than Finrod might have succeeded, but Finrod is dead anyway. So Fingon, but I think Fingon has succeeded before Finrod dies. So Fingon, I guess, is just the oldest who is not in the line of Feanor. Maybe that's what's going on. Anyway, we'll touch on that again in this discussion. So there's not much help from Nargothrond, and they partly also trust in their hiddenness. There is potentially a foolishness there, and it wasn't really what Finrod thought. Finrod was not planning, or in that sense, Orodreth may be making a bad call. From Doriath came little help. For Maethros and his brothers have demanded the Silmaril from Thingol, saying, "Look, you have to give it to us because it's our father's. He made them. It's his, and we've promised to get it back. It's our family possession. Or you'll become our enemy if you don't." And Melian counsels Thingol to give it up. She understands it doesn't really matter, and disaster is going to come to anyone who attempts to keep what is actually fundamentally the possession of the gods, of the Valar. And Thingol is angry at the pride and bullying of the sons of Feanor, and indeed we're then told, as he looks more and more upon the Silmaril, the more he desired to keep it for himself, for such was its power. Therefore he sent back the messengers with scornful words. There's an interesting thing there that should remind us, of course, of the Arkenstone or of the Ring. And he's a Noldor. He's not an Noldor. Sorry, he's an elf. So he's not got the same exact desire for these things that dwarves seem to have a predilection to. But the idea that objects have power, and powerful objects have power, and beautiful objects perhaps have power, is quite a common theme in the Legendarium, and so Thingol now is being corrupted, basically, and we've seen some of the same instinct to possessiveness that is not to do with the Curse of Noldor itself come over him over Luthien. There's nothing to do with the Curse of Noldor, but now the curse, because he demanded a Silmaril from Beren, the curse has come into Doriath, and now it works upon his heart, and he scorns the Noldor. Interestingly, we again hit Celegorm and Curufin vow openly to slay Thingol, but Maethros made no answer because he's trying to get people to be allies. Maethros has control to know that this is not today's fight. He's done his duty, he thinks, according to the oath, but really and it's stupid that, just leave it, say, we will deal with this after, we'll have to talk about the Silmaril after we have defeated Morgoth. But he knows that now's not the time to try to actively fall out. So the only elves who come from Doriath are Mablung and Beleg, we've heard of before. is Mablung the king's huntsman, and Beleg the chief march warden, Beleg Strongbow, who are unwilling to have no part in these great deeds. So they've got a different attitude to Gwyndor, who's coming for vengeance. They have a quite chivalrous attitude. There are great deeds afoot, and men go forth to war to achieve great deeds. They don't want to be left out. That's the attitude here. And Thingol says you can't serve the sons of Feanor, but so they too join the sons of the host of Fingon. Remember, there's no army from the house of Finrod here, because Orodreth has refused to leave his kingdom, and Angrod and Egnor are already dead. Their kingdom in Dorthonion was destroyed. So you now have just 2 houses. However, Maethros does have both hosts, Fingon and Maethros. They've got, and they're very close friends. They both have great hosts of men. Fingon has the remaining Haladin, and I guess the people of Marak as well, the remnants of those people who are living in Hithlum and Dorlomin in the far northwest, and the Easterlings under Ulfang and Bor. I think it's Ulfang and Bor, or Uldor and Bor possibly. Ulfang and Bor are marshalled with Maethros. Men are very important, and there's no sense in which, it's interesting, though you might look at particularly elven magic and say that's the great advantage. Often there doesn't seem to be a measurable difference in these great deeds. Beren is a man. Hurin is a man. These people who do great deeds are humans, and Beren, there is the exception. He's spoken of as the only human to ever do this sort of thing. He seems apart from the race of men, Thingol says. But there's this sense that except at the edges of the bell curve, or at the top end of the bell curve, men are able to do many of the deeds of elves, if not all of them. They also have, Maethros has, aid from the Norgrim, the dwarves, and these are houses in Belagost and Nogrod in the Blue Mountains, which are on the west of the Lord of the Rings Middle-earth. And they are not the House of Durin, so they're not the same houses like Thorin and Gimli and stuff like that. They are other houses. They're usually twinned. I forget the exact two in this case, but there's 7 houses, so the 7 rings for dwarven kings in their halls. And this pair have ended up in the far west. The House of Durin is in the centre at Moria, Khazad Dûm, further east, and from here. And then you have others further east again. Technically, we do know all those dwarves do ally and fight in the Dwarf Goblin War, and come to to avenge the enormities of the goblins of the Misty Mountains in the Third Age. So yeah, they inject. It's something we do sometimes have them come on the edge of the screen, but here this is one of the very few cases, along with Mim the petty dwarf, or kind of exiled dwarves who aren't really part of houses, or something like that. Who knows? But yes, we have here one of the very few named and great characters. We'll get to him, of the folk who aren't of Durin's folk. So you have these very powerful forces, but because Maethros, we're told he tries his strength too soon by clearing out the northern reaches of Beleriand for a time, presumably for a couple of years, having which the timeline is. They clear out Dorthonion, the northward regions of Beleriand. They free whoever's remaining there. They drive back the enemy. But this gives Morgoth just a moment to accelerate his plans, corrupting particularly men and spying on them. And Maethros says it's time to go on Angband, presumably to reassert the siege that was broken at the Braglach. But the armies of Morgoth, basically he's hoping he'll go forth and Morgoth will attack him, and then Fingon will hit them in the flank. And they go forth on Midsummer with the Elves of the Falas. Círdan has come. So Círdan, though I guess he recognises the overlordship of Thingol, has constantly been willing to fight alongside the host of Fingon, and at the Braglach had a marine raiding force going up and down the coast. They go forth with the host of Dorlomin and all the valour of Hurin and Huor his brother, and to them had come Hadir of Brethil with many men of the woods. And it's clear that there is an answer, that when Fingon's, his banners go up, Morgoth knows about it. But what Fingon doesn't know is that Maethros is being delayed by Uldor the Accursed, who deceived him with false warnings of assault from Angband. This is something where this is a fruit of the kinslaying, which the sons of Fingolfin did take part in. I guess the curse, the kinslaying itself, might be irrelevant if simply the people involved were Finrod and Orodreth and Angrod Egnor Galadriel, because and indeed the elves of Doriath, because they weren't part of it. But the curse of the kinslaying is on the first two houses of the Noldor, and the Oath of Feanor on the Sons of Feanor, and these things kind of compound and create this problem where basically you both see proximate causes. The proximate causes of what's going to happen are Uldor first fooling Maethros and then betraying him, and then and so on and so forth, and then there's confusion about this, and then this happens, and they blah blah blah. There's a moment in a moment where Fingon's host is drawn out prematurely due to Gwyndor being so angry because he sees his brother being kind of executed in front of him. So you have this kind of these proximate causes, but the ultimate cause, and this is the thing theologically, if you want to put it that way, in Middle Earth, philosophically, whatever, that causes can be compound or complex. There's not simply something where you say, oh well, due to this exact passage of events, this event happened. It's that the events are coordinated. So there is the proximate, immediate cause, which is just due to human, elven, Orcan decision. But then the ultimate cause of what's happening to Noldor here is really that they have a curse and a stain. The original sin of the Noldor, as Sir Lawrence has put it in the Discord chat we have about this, and it comes up in full force here. Nonetheless, there is hope as the host of Turgon comes forth from Gondolin with an army 10,000 strong, bright mail, long swords, spears like a forest. And Fingon hears Turgon's trumpet, and he cries out, "The day has come, behold, people of the Elrond, fathers of men, the day has come, the night is passing." People respond to him. They have great hope. They've got a great plan. They've got great hope. And Turgon has finally made the judgment. And Turgon is really a sage of a kind. Turgon thinks this is the time to go forth. Why? I don't think it's ever quite clear why, given he has this kind of insight about the future. And it's not going to work out for them. But I think, nonetheless, it's interesting if you're looking at the kind of military technology. We talked about that a bit. The military technology of Beleriand and the elves and so on. You have kind of the axemen of Doriath and the humans of Brethil as well are similar. You've got these marines of Círdan who are presumably therefore fairly lightly armed, that might have artillery on the ships. The classic Noldor armies are cavalry armies. They are march armies. They're ones that cover large distances with horses. They're horse archers. We've been told that a few times. The army of Gondolin is quite... the army of Nargothrond, at least in part, is a sort of fairly stealthy and low engagement army. It doesn't want to fight pitched battles, it seems. That's one of the things they trust in, that rather than sending an army. Gondolin is unique in the sense that it is just a heavy infantry army. It's the only elven straight up heavy infantry army that we see. The dwarves are obviously heavy infantry too. So if you're interested in tracking that side of it, you do have a kind of a sign. Tolkien thinks a lot about the military aspects of what's happening, I think. More than perhaps we do when we read it. He often thinks about why things happen. We talked about this actually in the chat too, that as this disaster unfolds, it's constantly close to... You can see why it's happening. You can see the military and political reasons it's happening. It's not like, oh, well, here's a story about, they tried to win, but then they didn't. It is that there is this real sense that this makes sense. These are both the organic actions of characters, but also how warfare and politics works. Morgoth turns to face Fingon. He knows Maethros isn't coming soon, even though Maethros is closer. And they turn up, and the Noldor want to attack them. Hurin speaks against it, says Morgoth is very clever, he's got great guile, and we need to wait. And they wait and they wait. And they taunt them, and they come up, and they bring Gelmir, the Lord of Nargothrond, whom they'd captured in the Braglock, and they blinded him, and they hew off his hands and feet and his head last by ill chance. This is, again, ill chance means providence. It means the sort of great designs of Eri Ilúvatar. It means the working out of the curse of Mandos, of the kinslaying. At that place in the outworks stood Gwyndor of Nargothrond, the brother of Gelmir, and he just charged out. And because he charged out, this is what this reminds me of is the Crusader Battle of Arsuf, in which the Lionheart, where Saladin eventually causes some of the Western knights, well, in fact, they're local knights in this particular case, the Crusader knights to charge, and then Richard says, well, the rest of us got to charge, or else they're going to die, and then we're going to die. So Fingon puts on his white helm and sounds his trumpet, and the host of Hithem leapt forth from the hills in sudden onslaught. The light of the drawing of the swords of the Noldor was like a fire in a field of reeds, and so fell and swift was their onset, that almost the designs of Morgoth went astray. Before the army that he sent westward could be strengthened, it was swept away, and the banners of Fingon passed over Anfalgleith, and were raised before the walls of Angband. Ever in the forefront of the battle went Gwyndor and the elves of Nargothrond, and even now they could not be restrained, and they burst through the gate, and slew the guards upon the very stairs of Angband, and Morgoth trembled upon his deep throne, hearing them beat upon his doors. Morgoth is not actually particularly brave. He didn't want to, because evil corrupts. It saps strength. It is rarely the case in Middle-earth that basically you don't have many Macbeths. Blow wind, come rack, at least we'll die with harness on our back. You don't have many of those. You chiefly have the reality that fear and corruption sap, and sort of a desire for status, sap your ability to do anything. You see this with the increased trappedness of Morgoth and Sauron into dark fell forms which are larger than a human but rely merely on brute strength and increasingly are unable to do anything else, anything useful. Whereas you look at Tom Bombadil, the master of himself. What's he the master of? Himself, that's who. Like, Tom doesn't need to be the master of anything else, and so he is completely free to do what he wants. He's able to control, the orderly music, the music that orders the world, the music of the Aina, perhaps. He is able to play to control things. He's not affected by the ring. And here, Morgoth knows logically he can't be defeated by, like, a couple of surviving guys from Nargothrond. But he's terrified because his foot hurts, because he's been so trapped into mortal form, physical form, that Fingon was able to really badly injure him 7 times plus his foot, was it? And so Morgoth trembles. And eventually the attackers are slain, apart from Gwyndor, and the main host comes out to push Fingon back. Then, on the 4th day of the war, so the campaign has gone on for 4 days. Maethros has been delayed, Fingon has been skirmishing and then fighting, with being reinforced by Turgon. Only on the 4th day of the war officially begins the Niarnaeth Arnoediad, unnumbered tears, for no song or tale can contain all its grief. This is officially the saddest bit, we're told, and it's relevant we're told that because we could say, oh, I thought the kinslaying was sadder, or I thought the Turin Turambar next is saddest, and there are ways in which those are sadder. But here we're told this is simply the worst thing that ever happens, in a sense, as a single event. The host of Fingon retreat over the sands. Haldir, lord of the Haladin, was slain in the rear guard. With him fell most of the men of Brethiel, and came never back to their woods. Very Tolkienian line. Eventually, there's the orcs round the host of Hithlum, and they fought until day pressed ever closer. In the morning came hope, when the horns of Turgon were heard as he marched up at the main host of Gondolin. They'd been in reserve at Sirion, and they didn't follow Fingon when Fingon attacked. Basically, that is something you could say, well, surely that could have made the difference. No, it couldn't. Like, 10,000 more guys could have made a big difference, but not the difference. Turgon knows that Fingon's going, because Fingon knows at this point he can't restrain his host. They have to commit, they have to do what they can. But Turgon's very disciplined, heavy infantry, rather than a kind of horse archer army. Instead, Turgon has managed to restrain them, and he hastens to his brother. The Gondolindrim were strong and clad in mail, and their ranks shone like a river of steel in the sun. Tolkien is a visual writer. Maybe that's underappreciated. I don't know. I think he is constantly giving you things to look at and poetic images to kind of think. You can imagine it, can't you, on this great dusty field burnt up by the Braglach, with Fingon and his host surrounded with the humans of Brethiel and of Dor-Lomin, Indeed, presumably any who have grown up who were young from the house of Beor, who have come from Dorlomin as well. The great strength of the Edain, the first men, and then there's this river of steel shining in the sun, pouring towards them to their aid. And the phalanx of the guard of the king breaks through the ranks of the orcs, and Turgon hewed his way to the side of his brother. And it is told that the meeting of Turgon with Hurin, who stood beside Fingon, was glad. Remember, Hurin and Huor are flown by eagles to Gondolin, which is why they're allowed back out, because they're taken back out rather than by the secret way. And these guys are friends. Turgon has loved Huor and Hurin. He thinks they are remarkable men. This goes back to the point I made early on. And then hope was renewed, and at the 3rd hour of morning the trumpets of Maethros were heard. So 9 o'clock, Maethros arrives too, finally no longer delayed. Some have said that even then the Eldar might have won the day had all their hosts proved faithful, for the orcs wavered. Their onslaught was stayed, and already some were turning to flight. Again we have this nearly. And the point here being that though they couldn't have defeated Morgoth, we know that, we've been told it repeatedly, and some of the elf lords know that, they could have defeated the orcs and driven Morgoth back. But at this point, as the vanguard of Maethros comes out, Morgoth sends forward all his reinforcements, and Glaurung, the father of dragons, comes between Maethros and Fingon, sweeps them apart. Yet neither by wolf, nor by Balrog, nor by dragon would Morgoth have achieved his end, but for the treachery of men. Which must be one of the most heartbreaking lines, surely, when you think about it. Glaurung, the father of dragons, Gothmog, the captain of the Balrogs, couldn't have defeated the host here, except that humans who are one of the two children, kinsfolk or children of God, of Eru, they have great capacity for good and evil. In a way that it's something, the creations of the... It's fair to say, in fact, all the creations of the Valar do not have the kind of capacity for good and evil that elves and men do. And I think that's something we're meant to take away from the way in which the key actions in the Silmarillion are not even those of the Valar, really, most of the time. The key actions are those of elves and men. And men are much less important here than they are in, obviously, later on in the Third Age, particularly in Lord of the Rings. But it's that dwarves can get greedy, but they can never be totally turned to corruption, pretty much, at least en masse. Is the general sense. They can be destroyed by their greed, but they are hard to fool into just doing out and out perverted evil things. The eagles even less so, obviously. The Ents even less so as well. On the other hand, Morgoth's creatures, they're very evil and they do perverted, disgusting things, but it's not creative. There's no depth to it. There is no heroic tale, anti-heroic tale of how amazing dragons and giant direwolves like Karkaroth and Balrogs are. They're just all kind of horrendous, corrupted creatures. There's nothing to them. It's elves and men who can accomplish these things. The plots of Ulfang are revealed. Many of the Eastlings turned and fled, their hearts being filled with lies and fear. But the sons of Ulfang went suddenly over to Morgoth and drove in upon the rear of the sons of Feanor. And in the confusion they wrought, they came near to the standard of Maethros. But they reaped not the reward that Morgoth promised them, for Maglor slew Uldor the Accursed, the leader in treason, and the sons of Bor slew Ulfast and Ulwoth ere they themselves were slain. But new strength of evil men comes up, and the host of Maethros is broken. So the other group of Eastlings redeem their name. The sons of Bor redeem their name by staying faithful. They've heard the same lies. They've been maybe even tempted with the same offers, subtle offers, maybe not as advanced in negotiation as Ulfang, but they redeem themselves and save Maethros. For good or evil, we'll find out. Fate saves the sons of Feanor, and though they're all wounded, they are none are slain, and they drew together, gathering a remnant of the Noldor and the Norgrim about them, and they escape towards Mount Dolmud in the east. So they managed to escape, and the last of all the eastern forces stand firm with the dwarves of Belegost, and thus they won around. This is the first great deed of dwarves in the whole of the Legendarium. They've got great metal masks, battle masks. They're a terrifying sight. They look like, think of it, they look like golems or robot men or something. They don't look like just tiny humans, like short, chubby humans. They look like strange beasts, and this stood them in good stead against the dragons. But for them, Glaurung and his brood would have withered all that was left of the Noldor. But the Naelgrim made a circle about him when he assailed them, and even his mighty armour was not foolproof against the blows of their great axes. And when in his rage Glaurung turned and struck down Azagar, lord of Belagost, and crawled over him, with his last stroke Azagar drove a knife into his belly, and so wounded him that he fled the field, and the beasts of Angband in dismay followed after him. Glaurung and the other great beasts of Angband were dealt with. This is the point about why it had to be men betraying Maethros. If it was just about that, then the dwarves of Belagost defeat Glaurung. They drive him from the field. And this is there is an epic character to Azaghal and the dwarves who decide they're just going to go in their Baroque armour and go and surround the Father of Dragons. And then it doesn't stop there. They then raise his body, the remaining dwarves, and bear him away, and with slow steps they walked behind, singing in dirge and deep voices, as it were a funeral pomp in their country, and gave no heed more to their foes, and none dared to stay them. So the last of the eastern host leaves, but not kind of hewing their way out to Mount Dolmud, which is what the main host of Maethros, the survivors, do, but instead unharassed by the enemy, because they've just seen these dwarves charge down a dragon and wound him that he's had to flee. These guys are psychopaths, basically. In the eyes of the creatures of Morgoth, the dwarves of Belagost are terrifying. We don't get many of these great scenes of dwarves. We get some of it in The Hobbit. We don't get any in The Lord of the Rings. We get descriptions of stuff, but we don't get any battle scenes, really, from the East. And so, apart from a bit in The Hobbit, this is really one of the great sources of dwarven heroism, and the way in which they are a different culture. This slow funeral dirge doesn't feel very elven in the same way. It is, as I say, Baroque is the word, isn't it? You can see why GW, one of the inspirations they found for the Chaos Dwarves was the Assyrians. I think there's something very aesthetically sort of prehistoric or early Middle Eastern about them, especially the names Azaghal. Kajad is a language which is Semitic. It's the most Semitic of Tolkien's languages, along with Adonaic, the Númenórean language. But now in the western battle, Fingon and Turgon are assailed by everyone who's left, basically. So Gothmog's there, and he eventually gets rid of Turgon and Huron. They are pushed away. His forces, the Balrogs, charge in and push them away, and he fights Fingon, and Fingon's guard eventually are all dead. And he fights with Gothmog. He's only defeated. He is fighting toe-to-toe with Gothmog, who is a Maiar, an angel, one of the spirits of fire, who fell early, who were the earliest to be corrupted by Morgoth. And he's only defeated when another Balrog catches his ankle, basically. And then Gothmog hews him, and a white flame sprang up from the helm of Fingon as it was cloven. Thus fell the High King of the Noldor, and they beat him into the dust with their maces, and his banner, blue and silver, they trod into the mire of his blood. Fingon is the fourth High King of the elves to die due to of the Noldor elves to die due to Morgoth, and he dies, heroically, but also he's humiliated. His body is desecrated. The field was lost, but Hurin and Huor and the remnant of the house of Hador stood firm with Turgon of Gondolin, and the hosts of Morgoth could not yet win the pass of Sirion. Then Hurin spoke to Turgon and said, "Go now, Lord, while time is, for in you lives the last hope of the Eldar, and while Gondolin stands, Morgoth shall still know fear in his heart." Turgon answered, "Not long now can Gondolin be hidden, and being discovered it must fall." And Huor has a vision. "Yet if it stands but for a little while, then out of your house shall come the hope of elves and men. This I say to you, Lord, with the eyes of death, though we part here forever, and I shall not look on your white walls again, from you and from me a new star shall rise. Farewell." And Maeglin, Turgon's sister son, who stood by, heard these words and did not forget them, but he said nothing. That takes us back and calls back to the chapter of Maeglin, and the fact that Maeglin loves Idril, Turgon's daughter, and knows that she's not interested in him, and knows how much Turgon and Idril appreciated Hurin and Huor when they visited. And Turgon gathers the host of Gondolins, such as Fingon's people as could be gathered as well. And his captains Ecthelion and Glorfindel guard the flanks, and they retreat. Glorfindel is obviously a name you should know, and is relevant. But the men of Dor Lomin held the rear guard, as Hurin and Huor desired, for they did not wish in their hearts to leave the Northlands, and if they could not win back to their homes, then they would stand to the end. Thus was the treachery of Uldor redressed, and of all the deeds of war that the fathers of men wrought in behalf of the Eldar, the last stand of the men in Dor Lomin is most renowned. More renowned, apparently, than the bandits, the resistance bandits of Dorthonion, led by Barahir, out of whom comes Beren, is this thing where... and it's interesting, a big Tolkien theme here is the love of home. They don't want to leave their home. They refuse to leave their home. They so love their home. It's not they think, well, maybe if some of us could escape. None of them want to escape. If they cannot go back to their home, they would rather shed their blood upon it. In redemption of something. So Turgon escaped southward, and the brothers drew the remnant of the men of the House of Hador about them, back to the fen of Sirik, and had the stream of Rivell before them. There they stood and gave way no more. And then all the hosts of Angband swarm against them. Everything remaining. Maethros is gone, so everything that Morgoth has left bridge the stream with their dead, encircle the remnant of Hithlum as a gathering tide about a rock. And then as the sun wested on the 6th day, and the shadow of Ered Weathering grew dark. So we're talking about, late, several days after Maethros has arrived at this point. We're talking about they've been doing this for days. Huor fell pierced with a venomed arrow in his eye, and all the valiant men of Hador were slain about him in a heap, and the orcs hewed their heads and piled them as a mound of gold in the sunset, referring to their hair. Last of all, Hurin stood alone. Then he cast aside his shield and wielded an axe two-handed, and it is sung that the axe smoked in the black blood of the troll guard of Gothmog until it withered. He's fighting cave trolls. You think about all the effort that the Fellowship has to undertake to fight cave trolls, a single cave troll plus the goblins in Moria, and here he's just hacking, and the difficulty they provide at the Siege of Gondor, but here he's just hacking them down. Hurin is... he's a Norse battle god, basically, at this point. He's become a demigod in story terms. And there is also something where, an incredibly important thing for me, I think, thematically, this is the great moment of functionally greatest disaster in the history of the Noldor, functionally. There are harder, sadder things to come, but this is the moment where everything goes wrong, and nothing ever gets better in the form that it was. But here, this is exactly when Hurin, alone, fighting a lone rear guard, doomed with his brother and his friends, his cousins, those he's grown up with, dead around him, is when, as he hacks trolls to death all over the place, he cries out again. Each time he slew, Hurin cried, "Aure Enteluva, day shall come again." There is a big theme in Tolkien. The long defeat isn't a permanent defeat. It is through the moments of seeming disaster and tragedy that victory comes for the good guys. And eventually they capture him and take him back, and there is a great storm of wind out of the west. Presumably, is that from Manwë? Who knows? Great was the triumph of Morgoth, and his design was accomplished in a manner after his own heart, for men took the lives of men and betrayed the Eldar. From that day the hearts of the elves were estranged from men, save only those of the 3 houses of the Edain. Quite hard on the House of Bor, who stay steadfast despite facing the same temptations as the House of Ulfang. So you've now lost the realm of Fingon is captured, Hithlum, and it's given over to the remaining Easterlings. And the sons of Feanor have lost their kingdoms, because they have no army to hold even the Hill of Himring, which they held against siege previously. They go down and hide amongst the Green Elves of Assyriand in the land, so Amrod and Amras's land in the south, which some of them did last time as well, bereft of the power and glory of old. There are some few of the Haladin in Brethiel, but to Hithlum came back never one of Fingon's host, nor any of the men of Hador's house, nor any tidings of the battle and the fate of their lands. And the orcs go all over the north. They come to the borders of Assyriand and the borders of Doriath. Nargothrond is hidden. Doriath is safe. Obviously, Assyrian twice resists some invasion, and that should surprise us, because we're talking about, in both cases, there's Green Elves and a few of the Sons of Feanor and their hosts. But obviously it's just difficult land, and the orcs are reluctant in both cases to push south into heavily wooded, maybe quite rough land, ambush country. Many flee to the havens. Obviously the remains of the host of Fingon, as far as we can tell, have gone back to Gondolin. Those who remain behind, the elves and men remaining behind in Hithlum, are enslaved either in Angband or by the Easterlings. Many flee to Círdan's walls, the great havens of Brithenbard and Eglarest, but after a year they fall, and the most part of Círdan's people were slain or enslaved. We're talking about population scale disasters. It's a thing that when we look at the Third Age and we think, okay, so there's presumably maybe a few thousand elves in Lindon, there's a few thousand elves in Mirkwood, a few thousand elves in Lorien, a few hundred elves perhaps in Rivendell, or something like that. You know, whatever the numbers are, you're talking about pretty small numbers. Some tens of thousands perhaps total elves left in Middle-earth. And that's not a minuscule number for effect, but it's very small. But we're not talking. It must be the population in the First Age in Middle-earth before the Braglach and the Nirnaeth. Must be not just in the hundreds of thousands, but possibly in the millions or something crazy, probably lower than that. But it's something where you are talking about how whole cities are burnt down and most of their population is killed or enslaved. We're not talking about sort of, oh, there were 1,000 elves and some of them were killed. We're talking about whole cities worth. Now, the survivors of Círdan's people, including Irainian Gil-galad, the son of Fingon, flee to the Isle of Balar, and Turgon, who is now by right king of all the Noldor, presumably again because Gil-galad doesn't become the king, so it's not primogeniture there, it goes sideways. Presumably Turgon is now the eldest male heir of the two junior houses. He's older than Orodreth then, and he's the last of his father's sons. Angrod and Egnor, Finrod and Fingon, all dead. Turgon again has ships built. Remember, Turgon understands that they can't win. He's always understood this. That's what it seems Ulmo gave Finrod and Turgon, understanding that Fingolfin and Maethros lacked, that the Eldar couldn't win. And so he's already before tried to send ships into the West. He now sends 7 more. 6 never come back, or sorry, they all come back. They retreat at last, found in a great storm. But one of them was saved by Ulmo from the wrath of Ossé, and the waves bore him up and cast him ashore in Neverast. His name was Voronwë, and he is one of those that Turgon sent forth. So Ulmo does intervene. Ossé sees his duty. He's a slightly dodgy Maiar, one of the great Maiar, who is in control of the waves, and he doesn't always seem to behave as well as you'd like. But Ulmo here makes sure, Ulmo being the great friend of mortals or of created beings, makes sure that one of them survives, and that's going to be significant. Now, Morgoth really wants to find where Turgon is, and it mars his victory. He cannot be happy. Morgoth is a perpetually miserable person. Turgon is now the High King, and he knows that the House of Fingolfin has the friendship of Ulmo, his foe, and he resents the fact that Fingolfin, Turgon's father, wounded him so badly. And he fears Turgon, for of old in Valinor his eye had lighted upon him, and whenever he drew near a shadow had fallen on his spirit, foreboding that in some time that yet lay hidden, from Turgon ruin should come to him. We now have the counter prophecy and providence. We've seen, no, they can never win. Even when they have great plans, someone betrays them. There's some confusion. Something gets in the way due to the kinslaying, due to the rebellion against the Valar. But this is the counter. Morgoth understands enough to know that doom is upon him, and that Eru and the Valar have, in some way, particularly I guess Eru really, have arranged this to be Turgon. And so he says, well, Hurin's got the friendship with the King of Gondolin, I've got him. So he drags Hurin back, and Hurin defied and mocked him. And then Morgoth curses and dooms Hurin's entire house. And he sets him in a chair of stone up on a high place, bound by the power of Morgoth, and he curses him again, and he gives him basically the eyesight of Morgoth, and the insight, the kind of supernatural power to see. And you'll see everything that happens. Thou hast dared to mock me and to question the power of Melkor, master of the fates of Arda. He's not master of the fates of Arda. That's the exact conceit that's destroying him. Therefore with my eyes thou shalt see, and with my ears thou shalt hear, and never shalt thou move from this place until all is fulfilled unto its bitter end. And so it came to pass. But it is not said that Húrin asked ever of Morgoth either mercy or death for himself or any of his kin. Húrin, having been faithful to the last in battle, is faithful, never betrays Gondolin. That's the thing. He wants to know where Gondolin is. Morgoth does. Húrin never betrays it, despite everything we're about to read in the next chapter of how the curse of Morgoth, almost whose last power seems to be spent, whose last great power seems to be spent, of all things, on cursing one guy, out of spite. We do end this chapter of Unnumbered Tears with a great Tolkienian off-note, an intentional off-note, in terms of it is a counterpoint, contrapuntal. The orcs gather the bodies of all those who are slain, and they pile them in a great mound in the midst of Anflaugleith. It was like a hill that could be seen from afar. It's a mountain of corpses. Houth en Undengen, the elves named it, the hill of slain, and Houth en Nirnaeth, the hill of tears. But grass came there, and grew again long and green upon that hill, alone in all the desert that Morgoth made, and no creature of Morgoth trod thereafter upon the earth beneath which the swords of the Eldar and the Edain crumbled into rust. Quite different, actually, from the from Daggerland and the Dead Marshes, isn't it? And the Barrow Downs corrupted by evil spirits. There's something here where the Barrow Downs are corrupted by evil spirits sent by Sauron, and the Dead Marshes, presumably there's something similar to with the corrupting power. But here, there is something that is made holy about this place. I don't know what the difference is necessarily. I don't think it's explicit. But here, you know, maybe if you decide to go and dump a High King of the Elves in a mass grave, you get your comeuppance and you're never allowed to go there again. I guess maybe that's it. Or if you take Huor. But yeah, it ends reminding us that everything Morgoth does turns against him eventually. Just like everything Noldor do has been turning against them, everything that Morgoth does must turn against him, because good, you know, there's good in the world, Master Frodo, and it eventually wins. So at the end of the Unnumbered Tears, we are reminded that good guys win. It's going to get worse first, though, and I guess we'll do that next time. If you've got any thoughts, add them in the comments. Till next time.